Thank you all for coming. Like many things in life, sometimes the beginning is at the end. So starting when we were supposed to end, but I just want to thank everybody for coming. To give a little bit of context for the talk, what you're going to see, this is going to be a classic panel discussion. I'm going to give a very, very, very brief introduction now, and then kind of move through the slides and let each person introduce themselves in their own words. There's going to be a number of slides after that. I'm going to move through them really quickly. All they are is just some resources, things that you might want to look at if you're interested in this topic. And if you want to follow up with that, we can make the slides available to people after the talk. They're not so much there to talk about here, but they're there because if you are at all like me, as you become engaged and interested in new topics, the thing that helps you get going the most is just a place to start. So I just want to introduce very quickly Dr. Brian Quinones, Nicolas Meade, and Timothy Grant. And I'm going to pass it, well, you have your own mics, but I'm going to let you each introduce yourself a little bit, and then I'll introduce myself at the end.
So hello, I'm Timothy Grant. I am the program director at Gaming Approaches Towards Education, where we use tabletop games in therapy. I also created Venture Societies, a role-playing game that teaches SEL, social emotional learning, as a sneaky way to teach it while still having fun at the table, right?
Hi there, I'm Dr. Nicolas Meade. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine and a clinical psychologist. And the focus of a lot of my research is using virtual reality and different kinds of novel interventions to support trans and gender expansive folks.
Hi, my name is Dr. Brian Quinones. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of New Jersey. I have the temporary permit for psychology to practice in New Jersey as well, and I'm a registered play therapist supervisor. Along with Timothy Grant, I co-own Gaming Approaches, and I'm there. I'm the clinical director, and we also co-created Venture Society with the idea of I wanted to make sure there was a game that could reach out to families, especially of kids either with on the spectrum and at a lower age.
Hi, everybody. I'm Justin Berry. I'm at the Yale Center for Immersive Technologies in Pediatrics, and a lot of my work is looking at the different ways that we can find or discover agency in virtual worlds and through play. One of the things that, let me just quickly show those, some of the slides. If you're interested in this, there's some really good organizations out there. There's the Bodana Group and Game to Grow. And we'll talk a little bit about safety tools. I know that for many people that aren't familiar with role-playing games, that can be kind of like a confusing topic, like what do you mean safety tools? So these are just a number of sites and links. And again, if you want to take pictures, you can, but also I can make these available after the talk. And again, just some additional resources here, some good books to check out. The Fate Accessibility Toolkit, Therapeutically Applied Role-Playing Games, the Game to Grow Method. Quick shout out to Elizabeth, thank you. One of the authors is here. Role-Playing Game Studies by Jose Zagal, and the Game Master's Handbook of Proactive Role-Playing Guidelines and Strategies for Running PC-Driven Narratives. Over on the right, you'll just see some examples of games. Many people, when we think about tabletop role-playing games, if I were to ask people what that means, I think most people would sort of say Dungeons and Dragons and stop right there. But it's actually a really diverse and wide field. And one of the things that we'll talk about is when we are trying to use these games to really give agency to young people or to help people find community or serve other purposes, sometimes Dungeons and Dragons is the right game, and sometimes it's not. And one of the biggest hurdles is trying to figure out what game does fit the particular community that you're working with. And so that's one of the things that we'll be talking about here. I'm just going to go back to that first slide. So I don't know what happened. I'm not a technical wizard, which is humorous because I'm supposed to be for my day job. But
That's funny.
the thing that I was going to say is one of the things that came up was this idea of finding ways to support people or create community where the feeling is it is not something that they're finding friendship or fun, but that it's done and that it is centered in joy. That there's clinical approaches to using this, but that you're not just treating a problem, you're also providing joy. And I guess I was curious on that note if there were any of you that wanted to speak to that, the value and the power of centering these tools or these interventions in joy and play.
Well, I guess I'll start. So one of the things that we do in the office is we try to connect people with their communities, right? Who are they and what are the needs that they have? And trying to build community in that sense and trying to bring joy, right? Some of the things that we'll do is try to link people together and play games in the sense of who are they? What do they want out of play? What brings them joy, right? And how can we also help them get to the point where they're working on the things that they need to work on? So we're looking for games that sometimes like Belonging Outside Belonging, designed by Avery Alder. She or they design games that deal with belonging, right? Belonging to a community. And that could be any of us, right? We can belong to anything. Any of us can fit in playing these games. Most of these games are queer central, where they're talking about identity. And we want to explore those things in identity, right? And how do we do that? And how do we have fun doing that? So we want to talk about things like safety tools at the table. We want to talk about things, what do we not want in this world? Do we not want homophobia in this world? Do we never want to deal with this in our game? Or is this something we do want to deal with, something that we want to try and build adversity for, right? That resiliency towards.
Yeah, I would, beautifully stated. I would also add that I think so much of what folks with any sort of marginalized identity hear all the time is stigma, right? Everything is about how this is a problem, how this is difficult, how this makes your life harder. And I think when we center joy, we center people's abilities to celebrate who they are and not just kind of focus on the stigmatized part and the difficult parts, which are real, but also the parts that bring us joy and make us feel like we belong.
I think some of when we first started, I was doing in-home therapy, and I kept referring my clients like, hey, go and do groups. And then we would hear back, there are no groups for us. I was specifically working with the autism population, and I just got fed up, and I was like, all right, fine, we're going to make our own. And so we make our own groups, and we're doing it at 2-3 people at a time, right? Age group was anything from I think our youngest in those groups may have been 9, and our oldest in those specific groups were probably 18. And trying to find the right combination so they can share in play and share in their joy, and in some of their cases, find out what that is because they never had the opportunity to try.
In talking about the work of Avery Alder and thinking of a game like Monster Hearts, for those that don't know, Monster Hearts is a game centered in the sort of close to our real world, where each of the players is a different high school student that is hiding a secret monstrous identity, right? And that's the structure of the game. Something very different from a game like Dungeons and Dragons. And on the surface, you were talking about sometimes wanting to center these sites of trauma or struggle, but also sometimes not wanting to. wanting to make the game an escape or an opportunity to kind of catch a breath from carrying that burden. And so I guess I'm interested in what it means or what it looks like to choose a game for different communities. And I guess if there were some examples of games that might work or games that don't, or even answer more generally.
So picking games, that's sometimes a very tricky thing, right? Because we're trying to find something that everyone at the table can all say, yes, I want to do this. And sometimes that is very hard, right? The buy-in for everyone to be like, yes, I want to be, I want to play at a magical school, something like Harry Potter, or maybe I want to be in a sci-fi world, and we all want to be different aliens from different species from all over the universe. Not everyone likes sci-fi. Not everyone likes magical schools. So it's hard sometimes to find the right thing as a theme. But then we also have to think about, what does everyone want to really do in this game? Right? Do I want to have social encounters and really like talk through things and have these emotional connections with people? Or do I want to just go run and smack things with my sword and kill them along the way, right? And get experience, and now I have skills. And what if I want to play a game and I don't have any of that? I just want to be a person, and I just want to have fun in this world. Maybe I just want to be an NPC in the world and just own a store and live in this world, and maybe that's what's fun for me. So it's hard sometimes to find that connection that everyone, what is that one thing everyone could say, yes, I want to have the buy-in to do this.
But the queen is under attack. Do you protect her? Do you help her? That's the last question you were asked in a game called For the Queen. So the idea is that you're playing with a group of people, and you're traveling with the queen, and it's interesting to see how a group will come together and pick what their queen looks like, and then a group will come together and decide, this is who and how I'm helping on this journey. And so playing games like that, I tend to lean more towards narrative driven rather than dice driven, and so I would pick a game like that. That's definitely a game that's hitting the table. Also, other games like more indie games, for example, The Beginning is the End. You can find it on itch. It's maybe like $5. And the whole idea is you're building this world, you're building your characters in this world, and as soon as you're ready to start your game, it's over. So it's all about the world building and all about working together in that way. And so like we were saying before, the idea of trying to find that right fit for the person, and having an understanding of, okay, what kind of games, what kind of stories does this group want to tell?
And I think another way maybe of also phrasing that question is that there are many different games and many different systems, right? They take place in different worlds. Some of them might be on a spaceship. Some of them might use dice. Some of them might not. But these kinds of games, more generally, have tools that make them really effective at creating rapport and community and driving social interaction. And so maybe rather than thinking about it in terms of what is the right game or the wrong game, maybe it's looking at what are the aspects of these games that feel the most effective to leverage in this kind of goal of creating community among players?
So number one, my go-to game that usually hits every table is Kids on Bikes or Kids on Brooms. They're games that really are building community right in the beginning, right? You're creating this character who lives in this world, and you are now also figuring out, what is this town you live in, right? We all live at this town. What are some landmarks here? What are some rumors we heard about this town? And we're building it together. It's not just the GM being an adversary, It's a GM working with everyone at the table, building the community right there, right? You're building this experience together. I'm telling you what my rumors that I potentially want to see in this world so that I can explore that. And maybe this will come up and maybe it won't because it's a rumor, right? But it gives the opportunity to discuss at the table with that very sneakily, right? Because we're not saying, hey guys, what do we want to play? It's, well, what are the rumors in this world? Are the rumors that, oh, under the bridge there's a troll? Or the house is haunted by someone who died 12 years ago, right? Maybe we're talking about, hey, I want to deal with something about grief. Maybe I want to talk about someone about their identity that hides under this bridge. Maybe it's not a troll, maybe it's a person, and they're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I think the other thing that occurs to me is inherent in so many of these games is an understanding of other people, and that other people are unique and sometimes unpredictable. And I think for a lot of folks who, might struggle either socially for a variety of reasons, or just are trying to make community, it can be so hard to really rely on people to respond in a certain way because we can't. And I think these games especially reinforce that idea that people are individuals and all of our choices are going to impact the people around us and have consequences, both good and bad.
I think for myself, for example, I like to set up a situation where there's some kind of visual spatial element to what's going on. So the idea of, like, think about going for a walk, you look at the horizon, as you're moving, you're relaxing. And so what I've done for families and group is the idea of playing games that involve a cartography component to it. This idea that, yes, you're in a town, but show me what the town looks like. Draw that town out. There's games like Junkyard, where you're just drawing different parts of the junkyard as you're looking for these specific items with your group. Games like The Quiet Year, where you're not playing the people, you're playing the community. You're not playing a specific person, you're playing like a town council. And you're still designing the town and trying to find ways to help everyone in it. So I do look for games that have that kind of mechanic, because I think about a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, you tell them to color, you tell them to draw, they'll just jump right in. And then trying to find ways to make that element shared with everybody else on the table.
One of the things that comes to mind, Tim, you were mentioning the game Kids on Bikes, and the idea that the players are actually building out some of the world in the act of play. And it kind of brings to mind, for me, that idea of safety tools. So for those of you that, I'm just curious, because you never know at an event like this, who here knows what I mean when I say safety tools for a TTRPG? Okay, more hands than I'm used to, but not a lot, right? The idea of a safety tool in a tabletop role-playing game, in the same way that Tim was mentioning the game Kids on Bikes, right? So you sit down with the players and you say, what are the rumors you've heard? The players being able to establish those rumors or those concerns, that's also a way of them establishing in some way the kind of stakes of the world. These are the things that we worry about. These are the things that we care about. Safety tools are kind of external, though not always. Sometimes it is embedded in the game, like Kids on Bikes, but it's a way of establishing before play a set of guidelines or rules to help keep the game feeling safe and comfortable for everyone. So there's some really quick examples. We would run out of time if I really got into the details, but just to address the general topic and say a couple really basic ones, there's one called lines and veils. So if you're using lines and veils as a safety tool, before the act of play, you might say, do you have any lines that we are not going to cross? Right? And someone might say, this is for fun or this is for engagement. I don't want sexual violence to come up. That's not in the game. That's a line. It's not a thing. Doesn't exist in this world. But then you might have something like a veil, which is like, if people want to have romantic relationships, they can kind of flirt, they can talk about it, but we're not going to go deep into the details, Keep that, we'll kind of, fade to black and move on. So this idea that players are able to set boundaries for the game before they even play the game. And to me, I see that as being a powerful tool, with this idea of building community, right? We were talking a little bit earlier about this idea of boundaries and what it looks like to have them be respected and what that feels like. And I guess I'm curious to hear from you guys about your relationship to how the role of safety tools and how they impact building an effective community in that shared rapport.
So one of the things I will always use is lines and veils. But I also add a thing called spotlights, because I don't always want to focus on the negative things in our games, right? Because we're doing things for joy too, right? We want to have joy and connect with each other. We don't want to just focus on the negative things at the table. We are not going to touch all these negative things that we just wrote down on a list. We want to touch on the positive things too. And I think that's a really powerful thing to connect with a bunch of people, right? I'm saying it's okay for my character to die, and I want to tell a story possibly where that happens. And if everyone agrees and no one makes that either a line or a veil where it's just like where we don't want to look at it, then everyone's agreeing, yes, I want to do this. But it's also a good way to gauge things like, I want there to be player death, but someone says, no, I don't want that because I don't want my friends to die in this game. That's a good way for everyone at the table to say, okay, I'm agreeing here as a group, as a community, to say we want to have fun, and player death isn't a risk at this game. The risk level is low, and we want to have joy, we want to have fun. So what else is fun? Well, I want to have a party in this game. At least every couple of sessions, I want to throw some type of party and have fun. And what does that look like? And having those discussions, it creates a way to openly talk with everyone at the table. What is our play going to look like? Is our play going to be fun? Is it going to be brooding? Is it going to be something where we're all going to deal with grief? What is the thing that's going to help us have fun at this table?
Yeah, I think especially when it comes to like safety tools and those conversations, they're really powerful. It's a really powerful way to, in a group setting, talk about boundaries and consent and what that looks like. And I think especially for folks, like when we're thinking of like some of the folks I work with have multiple marginalized identities and will often be really great at setting boundaries, but people are not great about respecting their boundaries. And some of those conversations can be kind of life-changing, to be in a space where you set a boundary and people just say, yeah, that makes sense.
It's also a good way to have those conversations at the table when someone breaks that boundary, crosses the line, and we can openly talk at the table. Hey, we already said that this was a no. We're a line, and we don't want to talk about these things. So let's define what those things are and openly talk about it in a non-judgmental way where it's not like, no, we don't want you at the table anymore because you talked about it. Let's actually talk about this and see what is something that we can make come out of this be positive.
And even with like playing off of that, right, and looking at some other safety tools that's out there, the idea of like script change, right? The idea of, okay, we're going to pause it right now. We're going to, kind of debrief, go through what's going on, what happened here. Okay, now let's go back. How can we play it out differently? One of the other things that, we tend to do in our office is the idea that some of my clients are not going to be ready to say what those lines are for them because they might still be like fresh wounds for them. So we have our own list of stuff that we're going to just X no matter what. We're going to put a line on these things no matter what. But then there's times where I might take the initiative and say, oh, hey, I don't want to see any, domestic violence or any abuse. And sometimes just by adding that in ourselves, it creates an opportunity for our players to actually bring up something different than we wouldn't have expected, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, following up on that, one of the things that comes to mind in what you just said is the idea that as a facilitator, right, you can kind of introduce yourself in different ways to bring up topics or make other people feel comfortable addressing them themselves. But one of the specific challenges that come to mind for me at least, in this idea of building communities is that if we think about how these games might be used therapeutically, right, there's facilitated clinical therapeutic play where you have a person that is there specifically to tend to the situation and care for it. Then you have like the wild west of a home game, which is like we're 6 people with no formal affiliation and we just get together and pretend to be dragons that eat babies or something. Like it can go anywhere. But then you have this sort of third category of this idea of creating communities based on the play of these games, where you want the players in the long run to be able to run games themselves. You want them to have their own internal, long-lasting community. This is something that came up with some of the work around VR-based support groups, right? The technology as an intervention proved to be really effective. But then there's this problem of like, okay, now what, right? We met all these interesting people, we have a sense of shared stakes, but what do we do? And so, kind of going back to that question of what safety tools can do and how they can be used, thinking about what does it look like to prepare a community or a group, starting off maybe in a clinical setting where you're running support groups and you have the opportunity to kind of, add that structure. But what does it mean to prepare the participants for running their own games or inviting their own friends, expanding on their own terms?
So for us in the office, we are first off, who's here familiar with the term session zero? Okay, so for us, session zero is like 5 sessions long, mostly because we want to make sure everyone is comfortable at the table, right? But we want to make sure that they're learning how to do that in real life, right? I'm going to school. I want to create a D&D group. How do I make it safe for me and everyone else that's going to be playing, right? And I want to make sure I'm slowly breaking it down and going through step by step with everyone to make sure they understand that these are all the ways you can do it. Whether you choose to use all these tools or not, I'm presenting them to you.
I just want to add one thing that that idea of a session zero, this is something that's popular in home games or just any context of play, but it's the idea that before you actually play the game and sit down and enter that world, that you have a session with all of the players and whoever's helping run the game to discuss, hey, do we want to play something silly? Do we want this to be, grim and dark? What kinds of characters do we want to play? So that is something, just to clarify that idea of what a session zero is.
What I would also add to that is the idea that when we started this, it was like, okay, we're going to make these little communities, and then it's okay. Wait, where do they go after this? And another way to look at safety also is we might have clients coming in who had a horrible time playing D&D because there was no safety involved, and in that particular set for them, it's like, okay, how do you learn to make sure that people don't go through what you just went through? As well as the idea that, meetups, libraries, gaming stores, Start Play. You also have the Adventurers League, I think that's D&D, and then you have the Adventurers Society, which is, I believe, Pathfinder. So there are these groups out there. But on our end, it's to make sure to teach them what is a healthy group and what is unhealthy for you.
So I have two examples, one good and one bad, of what could happen, right? A colleague of mine, she went to a convention for the first time. She's a woman of color, and she went to go sit down at the table to play D&D for the first time outside of her home game. She sat down at the table. She was the last one to arrive at the table. And she sat down. There was minifigures for everyone. The only things that were left were white women that barely wore anything. And this is a fantasy world, like Dungeons and Dragons, where if I'm wearing a chainmail bra, that's not going to protect anything, right? How am I going to survive in this world? So she sat down and she looked at all the figures, and she looked and said, there's nothing that represents me here. I don't feel safe at this table. And she looked at the GM and she said, I'm sorry, but I can't play here because I don't feel safe. And she got up and she left. That's one of the negative ways to look at it, right? Where we're not showing enough inclusion on our tables to bring enough minifigures just to show at least diversity. There was no other figure at that table that could have represented her. And that was the thing that made her say, I don't feel safe. One of the positive sides of it, though, is running games like this. I got to see someone who was so socially awkward and had such social anxiety that they couldn't even speak. It hurt to speak, would cry when it was time to speak. And this was just playing board games at first, at a very entry level. Once we got to the point of role playing, and after a couple years of doing it, this individual was now saying, hey, I want to start a D&D group at school. And it's like, wow, like you went from someone who could barely speak at the table to now saying, I want to run this game for other people. It's such a powerful thing to see. And giving the person the tools to be able to feel safe to be able to do that is very rewarding. And it's great to see those types of things happen.
Yeah, just to say that, I think that one of the challenges in this sort of field is that, tabletop games historically haven't always been particularly inclusive or welcoming, right? Sometimes like even the way that the rules themselves were written. But I think that those games have come a really long way, and there's a tremendous number of games that, serve to kind of give voice or opportunity for different perspectives and different ways of seeing the world. And I think that, part of that idea of safety tools is if you've never played in a home game of D&D with someone who's particularly toxic, God bless you. You might be in the minority there. That's a very real thing, in part because these games are so expressive that they give us a way to express ourselves in a way that's both positive and negative. And I think that if the goal is to build community, it's giving people tools to advocate for themselves, to insulate them from that kind of dynamic. Safety tools are funny because, if you're talking to someone about them for the first time, like for a home game, just with friends, sometimes it's like, oh man, like, wow, like you're okay, like we gotta do safety tools. But then you talk to people that use them and they're like, that was the best game I've ever played, right? Because you know the area in which you can play. And I think that the idea of building community is creating that shared, it's not just saying what are my boundaries, but it's having a shared set of boundaries, recognizing the needs and values of everyone else at the table, and learning what it means to navigate within that space.
I think you bring up a good point too about toxicity at a table, right? A toxic player. As a GM, you also need to learn leadership skills, right? To lead this community that you're playing with. Because if you can't have that conversation with that person who is being toxic at the table and in a meaningful way with everyone, then there's going to be a problem, right? Because now you're not creating a safe space. You're allowing the toxic player to take over and now make this an unsafe place to play. So there's a lot of things to learn, even within the GMing part of it, right? Because it is a community and you're all working together.
I think also with like the clients that we've seen over the years, one of the things, especially within play therapy, there's some books out there that would say you keep the group small, 2 to 3 people, and also if they have a very high level of anxiety, this may not be their first start. Like you might need to start somewhere else. You might need to build them up to be able to get to that point. Now, when you add the idea that you have these levels of anxiety made worse by somebody who may not, if yes, they're toxic, they may not even know how to not be that, because that is how they engage with the world. And so GMing or being a therapist, being mindful in those situations of trying to navigate both of those needs for all your players, and then deciding what, you know what, this might be either a place that we dissolve the group and stop, or this might be the wrong game, and let's try something different.
Yeah, and I think that's when it could be really important to also look to the group, right? What we do in group therapy often is have more than one facilitator present, obviously, but also as a group, we establish values. We establish things that are okay and not okay, and how we want to handle those moments, which I think safety tools. And also, I think, you know, as a group, finding ways to call people in as often as possible, but also having a way for the group to say, hey, this doesn't feel right. And then the facilitator might be able to kind of step in, but as a group, so it's not really on one person. As a group, people can say, like, we don't really value people being treated this way in a game.
I would also like to normalize something that is the co-GM, someone that is also GMing with someone else, because in the therapeutic world, like that is something that most of us usually do, is have a co-facilitator. But I think it's a really powerful thing to have at the table too, right? Where it's not just on you. Everything isn't just on you at the table. You have someone else that can back up. They can pay NPCs for you, non-playable characters, right? People in this world that are inhabiting, but you also don't have to have conversations with yourself, right? How many people are in this room and you're playing all of them? Having someone else at the table who can go back and forth with you while the other players are interacting with them, it's very useful. And I think it also creates space for everyone to start learning these skills, taking turns on how to be this leader of the group in a community, right? Because now we're practicing active skills of dealing with things like people who may be a problem at the table, maybe things that come up in our lines or our veils. We can start talking about them and giving turns for people to talk about those things and learning to be a leader in a community.
I do want to make sure that we save a few minutes for questions, if anybody has them. I also though I just wanted to throw out one last thing, which is to say that we didn't get a chance to cover it very much in conversation, but to say that one of the really powerful things about the way that these games can build community is that they can give people who might only have a shared language, which is grounded in trauma or distress, and it can give them something else that they share in common, a language, a set of inside jokes that they can use to communicate with each other on a deeper level. And that's a very important and powerful thing that I wish we'd had more of a chance to get into. But if you've got a question, I want to hear it. So,
what consideration should be given to physical ordinances and design of all audio elements, cards, tokens, or this one? And the second part is what you envision could be ordinances made possible by AR, XR, and or near-field communication devices that would be power to create greater engagement.
The thing that I would say is this is actually something we spoke about just before the talk. There's a game that just came out called Daggerheart. It's in the process of coming out. It's in beta, but it's by the people that are part of the group Critical Role. And we were talking about one of the nice things about that game is the way that they considered accessibility in terms of having a lot of, cards for people to look at, visual reminders of rules. They externalize certain things, like when you take an action, you move a token over and stuff. But we were also saying that in some ways, that's on one level that's really good for making the game more accessible, but it can also be a real challenge in terms of managing all of these different little things or having to carry them around and keep track of them. So I think that there's a really broad range in these types of games where, there's this idea of the theater of the mind, right? Where you're playing the game and there's no visual cues versus having a really elaborate set of miniatures and terrain and so forth. I think that there are many good ways to incorporate XR to these tools. This is definitely not something I should be talking about towards the end of a talk because this is sort of what I'm specifically interested in. But to say that it's important to think about where and when you want those tools to be a part of it, because one of the challenges you face with the XR implementations potentially can be, while they might add accessibility on one level, they also create a barrier of entry. And where you want to build community, it's like, you want people to be able to get started with almost nothing or from scratch. So I don't know if anyone wanted to follow up.
I would really like to see things like safety tools built into that, into the technology piece. I know it is a barrier, but it would be really cool to be able to tap on something to just see what are our lines and veils, right? What are someone tapping on something just to say, I'm hitting the X card, which is I want to stop play right now because I feel uncomfortable. Or hitting or using script change, where it's the VCR or the play, pause, rewind, those types of tools, being able to just see them up front to remind us that they're there. That would be really useful at a table to remind people we can use these things. Let's use these things.
And potentially use them anonymously.
Yes.
In other words, if I want to put the X card down and say, we're not going to talk about this, I don't have to say it's me saying it.
Yeah. And that's where I think the safety tool piece of it would be really useful with the technology.
When we were designing Venture Society, almost we're using the polymorph system. It uses one of every die, and almost the first thing we did was throw out the D4 because it's very hard to grab. And whether it was in or not wasn't going to make a difference. As far as, are you going to enjoy the game? You're still going to enjoy it. You just have one less barrier there. I would also look at something called Solo RPG. It's a website, and it does a good job of showing you all the other things you could be doing and using electronically, right? So here's a deck of cards, you just got to click on it. Here is, instead of something like Rory Story Cubes that just have images on 6 sides, this is a very large deck of pictures, black and white pictures. All you got to do is click it and you get a random, because you're not bound to the dice anymore. It's just whatever's in that database. So if you're looking for ideas like that, I would definitely turn there as well.
One final thing that I'll add on that, because this is something that we've been talking about or wanting to work on, which is that one really interesting affordance of XR is the potential use of spatial audio. And spatial audio is one place where that barrier of entry based on very expensive equipment, et cetera, doesn't necessarily exist. And why it's relevant to community and tabletop play is that when audio is spatialized, it gives us the ability to focus on multiple speakers at the same time. So if you think about being on a Zoom call where all of the audio is just going through one channel, two people cannot talk at the same time. It just becomes garbled noise. But if you're sitting at a table with 8 or 9 friends, there could be 5 or 6 conversations going on, and you can easily and seamlessly jump into one or the other, focus on the one that you want and move on. So in terms of creating remote play opportunities, right, where people that are part of marginalized communities that may not have a large number of people they can play with, like on their block or in their neighborhood, that are doing it remotely, there are some really useful and interesting ways that XR can make that experience better and more community focused, like a group of us as opposed to some of us listening to one person talking at a time.
Or a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you talked about making sure that spaces were safe, and that finding spaces that didn't have toxic players. I'm wondering what's like the rehabilitation like for those toxic players? How do we turn toxic players into safe players?
I think a lot of that comes down to the conversations that we're having at the table, right? And being very open, right? We need to be able to have the space where we can openly talk about things and openly discuss without judgment, without judging anyone at the table, just saying, hey, people at this table, we don't want to have this at the table, right? We don't have to name anyone out unless it becomes a problem, right? Or to the point where we do have to have that conversation, because sometimes that conversation needs to be had. But the rehabilitation part of it is really just working through it, right? We need to practice listening to the things that other people are telling us, hearing, hey, no one at the table likes it when you're yelling in people's ears. Even though it's fun for you, no one else is having fun because everyone else is really annoyed by it, right? And if that's a constant thing that always happens, that could be a toxic trait.
I would say time and patience in a lot of it. So one of the things that we have gotten used to doing is, here's your group, this is what we're doing in the group, and we might have individual role play sessions. And in those sessions, it's like, okay, like that's where you really zero in on things. We have a client that we've been working with probably for at least 4 years now. And every so often they want to go back to like an individual session of role play so they can practice these things out and retry them. And it took a while, but it's like, hey, I want to be a diplomat. How do I do that? Okay, perfect. This is where you need to grow. So let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. I was also going to say that, this would be where you would want like a co-facilitator, because that person can kind of step outside for a second and really spend some time with that person, depending on what's going on. Because if it is a behavior that maybe they're not even aware of, it could be something that, might be more beneficial to have as a one-on-one talk and then come back to the group. And then as a group kind of talk about like the impacts of that. But really just because we want the space to be safe for everyone, including if somebody makes a mistake and does something that really hurts or upsets another person, we want to teach folks also how to navigate those situations too.
So it looks like we're just about time, but maybe one last question. Yeah.
Are your costs covered by insurance?
Yes.
Yes.
That was really well timed. He's not a plant or anything. Thank you all for coming out. I hope that this was helpful. This is a really broad, wide-ranging topic, and there's a lot of work that's been done on it in a lot of different ways. And it's hard to kind of get deep into the weeds when we also have to take time to kind of like, well, what is this? Or what does this look like on a very basic level? And I hope that if you are kind of interested in sort of exploring this further, if you want, I'm more than happy to share these slides to follow up on some of the really great work being done by places like the Bodana Group or Game to Grow, people that have been doing this for a really long time and have organized a lot of really great resources for people that are interested and want to get started. So thank you all again for coming. And
Thank you.